I'm joined by Steve Mossop, who is the Executive Vice President for Western Canada at the polling firm Leger. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Harold.
Well, we're into an election again, and I'm grateful
Again.
that Leger's back to help us understand what voters are thinking in these weeks leading up to the election. So, first of all, there's been this shift in voter sentiment that we've seen in recent weeks, and it's been well documented by you and others. Remind people what's been happening with the polling numbers for the major parties.
Well, I have to go back to December 20th. It was our last public opinion poll on politics before the Christmas break. And we come up with a release saying, how low can the federal Liberals go? And at that point, they had polled 19% of the popular vote, and Poilievre was well into the high 40s. And I was telling my friends and whoever would listen that there's no chance that Poilievre at this point is going to not be our next prime minister. And here I am, possibly eating my words. We'll see. The election race has just been called, and we have several weeks more to go. But the first poll that we have out of the gate on this topic shows that the Liberal voting intention is actually higher than the Conservatives it's at 42% compared to 39%. That is the first time in the last 5 weeks that we've actually seen the Liberals peak over the top with Mark Carney officially taking the reins. So a real shocker and a real turn of events in a short period of time.
And those are the national numbers. You're seeing the same in BC.
BC is a little bit different, and we always have been a little bit different. Okay. We have had the Conservatives ahead for the most part, and yes, we have seen a switch to see the Liberal Party actually jump in the lead. It's not a whole lot different. It's actually stronger for the Liberals at 46% compared to 37%. So a little bit of a shift there that we didn't anticipate.
Well, it wasn't that many months ago, just a few months ago, that you and I were talking about the BC election, and the NDP won that one. How do you explain for people this sort of gulf between the strong provincial NDP vote and the weak support for the federal NDP in BC?
Wow, that's a real dichotomy of opinion, isn't it? Nationally, it doesn't necessarily line up. We have seen differences in the past on that front. The NDP brand in BC is very strong. It has been since EB was first on the scene. It didn't really drop when he came on, and they managed to maintain their lead during the election. Federally, the NDP is just completely dead. We're polling at 7-8% numbers, which is rock bottom, and there's not a hope that that is going to change. Although, I said that about the Conservatives a few short months ago, so I should be careful when I make those kinds of predictions.
Well, and I think in BC, the NDP is only at 13% in your latest poll. So
yeah, 13, and that's one of their strongholds, and they're going to do just as poorly here.
Right. So what is driving this shift?
If you go back just before Christmas, it really was, for all intents and purposes, one election issue, or maybe two election issues, and it was axe to tax. That was Poilievre. People were behind him. He was going to, make Canada great again, if I can borrow those words. He was really on the path of very little to say other than opposing Justin Trudeau. And then a short time later, we do poll people on a monthly basis and ask, what's the number one issue facing the country? And by far, tariffs and dealing with Trump has taken over. 41 percentage points say that that's the number one issue facing our country. That is, front and center compared to inflation, cost of living, healthcare, housing crisis, all those things that were really on the list up until that point, early February, when Trump made those announcements. So it's become, again, a one election issue race, and it's all about that singular issue.
So then how does Poilievre, is there anything in what you're seeing, an opportunity for Poilievre to turn the tables on the new leader, of course, Mark Carney, for the Liberals?
If the current situation stays the same, that is, Trump is spouting off his rhetoric about the 51st state and the Trump tariffs that keep going up with every countermeasure, then Poilievre is going to have a really hard time, because he is not seen, in our polling at least, as the best person to manage the relationship with the USA. We have 42% of Canadians picking Carney over the 29% who pick Poilievre, and that, unless that issue changes and suddenly Trump drops the tariffs and becomes friendlier, which could happen, I don't see a whole lot of change, at least on that one dynamic. We also see some interesting numbers in the data about the confidence in Mark Carney's ability to grow the Canadian economy. Again, 45% versus 31%. Who would have thought, given
Right.
the terrible numbers that we're polling with Pierre Trudeau, with Justin Trudeau just a short time ago. So there's a number of areas where Carney is really solid. I'll go through a couple more as well. Carney is seen to do more for climate change than Poilievre by a long shot. And suddenly that is important to Canadians. We've regained our identity. We're not the USA. We are doing things differently than the USA. He is also pulling well on making life more affordable Canadians than Poilievre and bringing change to Canada as well. So there's really very little that Poilievre is pulling better on. There's only two areas: reducing government spending and balancing the budget, and then strengthening our armed forces. Those are the only two areas that, at least in the issues that we track, where Poilievre is ahead of Carney.
That question of making life more affordable, that's got to be a big one for people, aside from tariffs.
It really is. And, here's the interesting thing. We've seen inflation actually drop, and the numbers have shown that. Every monthly report that comes out, whether it's Canadian or USA, the numbers are dropping. But there is a perception based on the tariff trade wars that things are actually escalating quite quickly. And when we ask Canadians, have you noticed a price increase in the last 2 weeks? We get something like 80% of Canadians saying, oh, I have. I've noticed price increases radically in the past 2 weeks. And it's simply not true. It's just a perception and a feeling of things to come. But sentiment is everything, as you know, in this game.
Right. Well, there's that, but you also, I guess, on the other side, there's that sense of stagnation that people are feeling. That maybe they're just, the job market is softening. It's not a super strong economy, at least in recent weeks. And I guess they're blaming the tariff war. Understandably.
It is. They're blaming the tariff war, and you're right. Consumer confidence in our last read is at an all-time low in 15 years. The perception that people are struggling, not the perception, but the reality that people are struggling, the perception that their neighbors are struggling, that the Canadian economy is going nowhere in the next 6 months is as bad as I've seen it probably in my polling year since the 2008 financial crisis. It's just terrible numbers. And when you have that sentiment against the backdrop of it worsening, that's a ripe part for Carney to step in and deal with those issues and hopefully go away.
Well, we saw that. I mean, it's a very different issue, but with the COVID and the pandemic, we saw, at least in this province, Premier Horgan call a snap election and get reelected because people wanted that stability. They wanted to carry on with someone. So perhaps there's a bit of that for Carney. There's a sort of stable as opposed to maybe trying something new.
I think there is that sense of let's get on this quickly. And politicians, when they see polling numbers like we're showing here, there's an advantage to jumping the gun. We saw it with Doug Ford in Ontario. When your polling numbers are high, call those elections. We saw it with Horgan years ago. Call that midterm election and take advantage of those strong numbers.
What do you think Poilievre will try to do then? What should our viewers be watching for in terms of both what he tries to do to find an issue for himself, but also what he tries to do to frame Carney?
I think he's looking to distance himself from Trump as much as possible, and we're seeing that in the news already. He's being very aggressive. His tone towards fixing the tariff issue and dealing with Trump has been very strong. But the problem is, it's the number from our March 10th poll, Harold. If you look back at it, it's about 38% of Canadians don't trust Poilievre. That's a problem, when you have that kind of a number. And we haven't asked the question specifically, but we will be, is people think that Poilievre is too much like Trump. And that is a real problem when you're trying to distance yourself from his antics. The overall approval ratings of Trump in Canada are 11%. Like, no politician has ever polled 11% in public approval ratings, but that's his number in Canada. So the more Poilievre can distance himself in any way, shape, or form, the better. He's got a long uphill climb, though, on that one.
All right. Well, good. Well, we won't get you to make any election predictions yet. We'll save that for closer to the elections. But I look forward to checking in with you again over the weeks ahead. Thank you.
And you've seen things can change, so we'll stay tuned to the latest numbers and we'll track weekly and see where it goes.